Hi everyone, today I want to talk about Vim macros. This video is a continuation of an ongoing NeoVim/Vim mini-series. We've talked about auto commands, we've talked about substitute, and today we're going to focus on macros. The link to the playlist will be in the video description and should be now somewhere above. All right, let's start. So first, what are macros and why do we need them? So macros, put simply, is a mechanism that allows us to record all keystrokes. In insert mode, normal mode, command mode, doesn't matter. Anything you can type in Vim or NeoVim, macro can record. So why do we want to record keystrokes? The main reason is that we want to repeat them and just essentially have actions repeated on various paragraphs or lines and so on. So we record something that is kind of little generic. So jump to the end of the sentence, and of course the sentence can be different, and then perform various actions. Macros combine very well with other NeoVim features. For example, substitution. They also combine well with external commands, giving you a really powerful, although quite complicated system that can help you edit files even faster. They are really good for data manipulation, especially if you want to manipulate data across several lines. Code refactoring, think like creating an async method out of synchronous method and so on. If you know Microsoft Excel, this is a little bit like Excel. Probably a poor analogy, but this will be easier for those of you who know Excel to understand. In Excel, you could click a macro that would record what you do, calculate various cells, create graphs and so on, and would essentially play it back. So this is kind of similar, but of course, way cooler. So how does macro work? We start a macro by typing Q, the command to start a macro. Then we decide which register to pick. I'm going to talk about registers in a second. Those are essentially letters from A to Z. They can also be capital letters. Capital letters append to an existing macro. Don't worry, I'll show this in action later. Once we've chosen the register, then we can start typing our commands. As I mentioned earlier, this can be anything. We can be in insert mode and just type regular text, or we can drop down to normal mode and start moving around or editing text otherwise, or even drop down to command line and start inserting commands and so on. So anything you can type goes into macro. Once we are ready and the set of keystrokes is recorded, we type Q, and thus macro is stored in a register. All right, macros are quite powerful, but there's something that you can use before you even start working with macros, and this is a dot command. Dot command is a really cool little function in Vim that enables you to repeat essentially various operations on text. Let's see it in action. So let's imagine here we have this paragraph that's lyrics from a song, and we decide that we want to change a word and replace it with XS. So CIW, change in word, and then XXX, and I hit escape. Now I can move with W to next word, and whenever I want to perform the same operation, meaning change the word to XXX, I just hit the dot, and you can see the last operation is repeated. Super easy, no need for complicated macros. I can do this real quick. That would work for any operation on Vim text objects. If you don't know what text objects are, watch the first video in the playlist. Okay, so this is something we can do before we even reach for macros, and that's often enough. We just repeat the operation that we wanted, and that's great. Okay, however, we want to use macros, and I always like knowing when to use a specific tool. So in terms of macros, they are kind of in the middle of this complexity / capability scale. On the left-hand side, I would start with substitution. So whenever you find yourself searching for a pattern and then performing a replacement, replacing it with different text or adding something or changing, that's where you want to do substitution. Those are very powerful. Again, I recorded a video about it. You can watch it in the playlist. However, if you start performing actions like you perform multiple steps, so maybe you want to first capitalize something, then you want to, go to the end of the sentence and do something, add, append, or whatever, then macros make sense. They are especially useful if you have to perform edits across multiple lines, add or subtract lines of text, because substitutions can do it, but it becomes really tricky. So I purposely put here substitutions kind of as part of macros, because macros can also execute substitutions. You can, for example, have 3 various substitutions that you want to perform in like a chain of actions, and this is a perfectly valid macro. You can chain multiple substitutions. So whenever you have this multiple notion that you want to perform multiple kind of set of actions on a specific text, then probably macro is a good tool to reach for. Obviously, macros are powerful, but they are not all powerful. There are some limitations, there are some quirks in syntax and so on. If you find yourself struggling with something that you will probably reuse in the future, and this becomes like a feature almost, then it's probably a good sign to start looking into creating your own Lua or vimscript function. Those are not that hard to write. I'll promise I'll record another video about it, how you can do this with Lua functions. All right, so now we know when we want to use macros. Before we start using them, let's talk a little bit about registers. So Vim works slightly differently than other editors. If you copy paste something in another editor like VS Code, you don't really think twice about it. You just copy and then go somewhere else and paste the same text. It is because the copy and paste works with the same desktop clipboard. You're essentially don't have really option at this place. Whereas in Vim, you actually have multiple registers. Those are special buffers that hold text you copy, delete, cut, and so on. So those are super useful. Let's see how this works in action. So we go back to the same file, and let's imagine that I want to copy this first line, starting with XXX. I hit double Y, which is copy the line, and then when I go to colon, so double colon, you can see that here at the top, XXX is in this double quotation. I'm sorry, this is a double quotation register. This is the name of the register, and by default, all the things you copy without specifying any register are going to land in this register. You notice that also it landed in a plus register, and here you see the text explaining what it is. It's a little cut, but essentially this synchronized with the system clipboard. So plus register means that whenever something lands there, it will be available in other applications because it will be a system clipboard. This is a setting that you have to do in Vim. I have it configured like that. And you also see that if we scroll a little bit here, you see that here register 0 also contains the same line. Why does it contain the same line? Because registers from 0 till 9, number registers, are essentially keeping history of paste of copy and delete or cut operations. So if you copy something once, it will be in register 0. If you copy something new to the default register, this new thing that you copied will be in register 0, and the old one will move up to register 1, which is really useful. So now that we know how to use those things, let's take advantage of it. For instance, since I copied this line, again, double Y copies a line, I can go, for example, a few lines down, and I can paste it with P. Nothing exciting here, right? let's go back to the same line and, for example, copy the other line into a different register. How to do this? I put a double quotation mark, then I choose a register, let's choose a register P, and then I copy it with double Y. So now we just copied something to register P. So let's do this again. Let's go to registers and we're gonna scroll a little bit. Again, you see in the P register is the second line. I also copied it to a Q register, to both. So now we have this other line in the P register. So how do I paste it? Again, quotation mark, and then I choose register, so P, and then P for paste or put. So once you get a hang of it, you'll see that it's really helpful. Typically, I hold 2 to 3 different registers and kind of remember what I put where. I have my little mnemonics and shortcuts how to do this, and this is extremely useful so that you can have like your little clipboards. All right, so registers, why they are important? They are important because macros work with registers. Before I showed you macros, let's show you a telescope plugin. Telescope plugin is something you definitely should have, and it also comes with a picker for registers. So I can use TS for telescope and then registers, and then you can see the same list, and here I can edit this list, and when I hit enter, it copies and pastes from a specific register. Really handy to use this with telescope. All right, let me revert all this, and then we're gonna go back to the slides. So registers were important because macros are stored in registers. So in the same way how you've seen me copying something into a specific register, when I record a macro, the keystrokes that we record are stored in a register. So once you know registers, you will understand macros much better. So let's record a very simple macro. So first we can start recording macro with hitting Q. Nothing happens just yet. Then I want to choose a register. By habit, I am choosing typically registered that has also a letter Q. So it's easier for me to remember. In this case, I chose letter A just to do something different. You can see at the bottom, I have recording at register A. At means that I'm recording a macro. And now, whatever I type now will be recorded in this register. So let's give it a try. Let's do something simple. Let's do capital I to edit the beginning of the line. Let's do minus and space. So we just edit a little minus. Then we do escape, and then we go with 0 to the beginning of the line. And then I hit Q one more time. That means my keystrokes are now registered. So let's see if my A register has some keystrokes. So remember, TS for telescope, register, and then let's go to register A. And here I have indeed my keystroke. So I have capital A, capital I rather, then minus, then space, and this caret and open square bracket stands for escape, and then 0 going at the beginning of the line. So all the keystrokes that I performed manually are inside of this register. So now, how do I play it back, right? Because I want to, so I recorded something, now I want to play it back. To play it back, we actually can do this in a really easy way. So first of all, we can go down to the line that doesn't have changes that we want to change. And I can do add. Add by default will put with output something that is inside of the register Q, because it's the default in my case. So that's not what we want. We actually want to, let me just go delete this. What we want to output something which is in register A. So I hit add and A, and we played back the same changes. So you can imagine that we're essentially making it so that Vim is pressing the same keys as we recorded. So again, add stands for execute something from a register, and then the name of the register, in our case A, that we did it. We could also say how many times we want to register something. So we can, for example, say 2 add, and A. But you see what happened? Instead of macro executing on a second line, we actually ended up with 2 minuses. And this is something important to remember about macros. Let's go back to the beginning and record the macro again. If you want to repeat macros on new lines after this is recorded, you have to think about it first. So let's record our macro one more time. Q, A, we started recording, capital I, minus space, escape, 0. And before we finish the macro, we go down the line. And now we can finish the macro with Q. So now when we play it back, let's say we want to play it back on 3 lines, we can say 3 at A, and it goes 3 lines, because part of our macro was also a motion down after we finished it. Little quirks like that you need to remember, but I hope you see how this can be done. However, this example is really trivial. It shows how you can use macro, but I wouldn't do this with macro. I would substitute. It's just way easier. Let's see this difference in action. First of all, before we do this, let's talk about editing macros. Let's imagine that we get back all the values. Let's say I am using a plugin called No Neck Pain, which I can call like that. And this plugin gives me this little scratch buffer. And this scratch buffer is something nice I can use for editing. So what I can do in the scratch buffer, I can paste the content of register A, and I can edit my macro. So again, I'm doing quotation mark, and A, and paste. And you can see that's simply my macro. And maybe I don't want to put here a minus, but rather I want to put here a star, like that. Once we did this, I can now copy it back to register A. So I modified my macro, I modified my keystroke, and now I want to get it back to register A. So I essentially do, again, quotation. I am choosing register A, and then end of the line, and then copy, actually the opposite. So register again, quotation, register A, and then we do yank, end of the line. So we yanked the whole line to register. So let's get rid of this scratch buffer and see what do we have now in register A. So registers and then A, and you can see now register A contains a star. We just edited it, edited our own keystrokes. So now when we say want to play the macro for the whole 4 lines, so we do 4, so we do again 4, add an A, and as expected, instead of minus, it puts a star. So editing macros is also something quite simple. Again, those are all of those are registers. Now, if we want to save macro, and this is kind of a territory that I don't recommend doing it that often, because you can of course save macro like I show here on the slide. You can just copy everything. I can also use a plugin called Macaroni, which is a really cool name, and then use the yank macro command, and you will essentially store the keys inside of a NeoVim key map. So it's not really a macro anymore. You recorded just set of keystrokes that you stored inside of a key map. It's perfectly valid to do so. I wouldn't think about them as macro anymore. They're just becoming simply your commands. But if you find yourself repeatedly needing those things, definitely good idea to set this key map and save a macro. Otherwise, macros are kind of more intended for if you have a big document, you have to perform some complex edits, but they are specific to this document. Again, you can save it. I'm not going to show you exactly how. I think this slide explains it well. But once you take all the keystrokes and you can place it in this part of whatever you want to execute, and you're going to essentially execute this macro when you type whatever key binding you want. All right. We can also do macros across files. So this is something I've talked about with the substitution video. You can watch how to use argdo, and this works exactly like with substitution. If you have multiple files, you do args to load the files, and you do argdo, and with the normal mode, execute at a or whatever register you want, and it will execute across multiple files. And here are some useful key bindings that I have. Capital Q in visual mode executes macro on all the lines. Leader M executes Q register. Leader capital M executes in a visual mode, and so on and so forth. So those are just some shortcuts that I found using. And this leader ML, this is a markdown list. You can see that it just does something similar we've done earlier. It essentially makes like a to-do, a markdown to-do. Okay, let's focus on some examples now. So we are going to, first of all, I want to show you, we've seen how to use .repeat, but now let's see how to use or when to use substitution. You remember that we could achieve this result here with actual macro. You could record, typing include and quotation, then jump to the end of the line and another quotation. But this can also be achieved with substitution. So in this specific case, if I want to have this result, I can do this with substitution. So let's do this. I'm dropping down into command line. Here you see at the bottom, I'm going to substitute this first line. So what I do essentially is search for the whole word, so anything. And what I'm going to substitute it with, so I'm going to change it to include. And then I'm going to add quotations. And I'm going to use ampersand symbol that stands for whatever I searched for. So now I can do slash, and I can put how many lines down I want to change it. And I can do 4 lines down, and you can see we ended up with the same result using substitution. So very often, if you operate something on a single line, I find myself reaching for substitution rather than macros. Although, again, as we see in a moment, macros can be much better for editing multiple lines. So let's imagine that we have this scenario here. I want to get this result. So I want to essentially take something like that and transform it into this. So what we need to do here, you can see that this comment at the code block we will be working with comes after the expression. And what we want to do, we want to take the comment, put it above the expression, and prepend the word note. That's kind of what we want to do. All right, so let's record it to the Q register. So we're going to do Q. By the way, it's a good habit to clean the Q register or a net register that you work with first. So Q cleans it, because with a Q I'm starting to record, with another Q I'm putting the register name, and Q I'm stopping to record. So I recorded nothing. So thus I clean the register just in case it's going to be interfering with something. All right, but let's start recording now. So Q, I'm recording macro to a register Q. So what can I do here? We can go and use F to find a hash symbol. So that places us on any line. It would be in different place, but since we are using normal mode, we can just F for find and then go and do the hash symbol. Then I want to delete from the hash symbol till the end of the line. And in NeoVim, delete really means cut into or cut it into a registry. So I do D and then $. You can see at the bottom here the keystrokes. So now this is inside of the default register. Now I want to do capital O to put a new line on top. I do escape to go back in normal mode, P for paste or put. So we essentially moved this little comment from the top here, from the same line to the top. And then let's go back with 0 to the beginning. I can hit A to go in insert mode right after this first character. And I type node and quotation here. I do escape, go back, and go one down. And that's my macro. So I can stop here. And if I go to the second line, then I can use my shortcut, which is QQ, and you can see it worked. So it took something from this line and put it up. In this case, this is initialized Y. If I drop down again, this should take the sum X and Y and place it up and so on. So let's do this. QQ, and indeed that worked. All right, so we did this in a nice way. So that's a nice macro. But we kind of clicked, or rather typed this Q all the time. So let's go back. And let's see if we can use the same trick where we have 4 lines. So we want to put 4 at Q. Oh, but something weird happened. This is not what we expected, right? We have like node equals 1, and it essentially moved in different way. And this is because we are adding lines to the macro while we run the macro. And that's essentially moves the order of lines. So once we work with one line, it becomes line 2, and so on. To circumvent it, we can use something which is called global execution. And this is a really cool way of executing commands over text that you find. So I'm going to select everything inside those triple backticks. Then going to drop here to the command line. Here at the bottom, you can see those symbols stand for beginning of selection, end of selection. Then I'm going to go for G for global. And I'm going to put caret symbol, which is, select every line because any line starts with something. So now I'm selecting and like saving all the lines in this global. And then I can do norm with exclamation mark, meaning execute only my macros. And then add Q. And when I do this like that, it works as expected. Instead, of course, of selecting this using the caret sign, you could actually perform a search. So you could match a pattern, and then on each line that you found, execute this pattern. And this would treat it separately and kind of let you add lines. So I personally find macros to be the most useful in those scenarios, specifically working with complex edits with multiple lines. We haven't talked about a few things I just want to briefly mention, but I believe they are important in certain circumstances, but they are a huge food gun. That's why I didn't want to show you. But let's mention them. One is recursive macros. Those are macros that call themselves. They have their uses, but they are really finicky to work with, and a lot of things can backfire. Joining macros together, you can actually take macros from various registers and put them together, glue them together. Same problem, they work, but I feel that they don't provide enough bang for the buck, so to say. You often have to troubleshoot it, and then if you have to spend so much time gluing macros together, then it's just easier to change something by hand. So those things exist. I just didn't want to show them to you, not to confuse you too much, but there's more to macros and more to kind of power that you can do. I mentioned earlier a little bit more exotic examples that are definitely useful, and I encourage you to experiment on your own. You can use search in macros, you can use substitute in macros, and you can use external commands. I let your imagination go wild and see what you can do with it, but those things are extremely powerful, and that makes macro to be like this good candidate for performing really complicated and crazy operations on text that would otherwise take a lot of time. All right, so that's it. We briefly looked at macros. They have their place in NeoVim. Let me go back to the slide where we showed how to use them. Definitely, when you think of macros, try to have this graph or diagram in mind, think of substitution first. Do I need to pattern? Is this pattern going to match something in change? If the pattern is too complicated, or if you spanning multiple lines, then it makes sense to make a macro. When you find yourself making the macro over and over, like recording it, and this is something that is, kind of becoming like a helper function, then definitely you can save it into register. And once you save it, you can just save it as a key binding, and then you will have it at every session. You can load it from a Lua or Vim file. And again, lastly, there are certain cases where macros are they're too complicated, or the edits you want to do are too complicated. And then it makes most sense to reach for functions. This is a completely different beast, and it has its own quirks, but knowing that there is those three kind of layers of things you can reach for depending on your needs is I think quite nice framework to think about it. And of course, don't forget the dot repeat, which is really underused, and it's pretty cool. All right, this has been already a long video. Thank you for watching. Thanks for your time. Thanks for the comments. I'm getting a lot of positive comments. I really enjoy it. If you would like to see any other topic about Vim or NeoVim, or something you're curious about, please let me know. And yeah, thanks again, and see you in next video.